Today's guest is someone who's lived multiple lives in one career, from professional skateboarding, which we're going to talk about, to building brands, to co-founding St. Archer Brewing, which is awesome, and exiting to Miller Coors, right? To now overseeing hundreds of millions in real estate assets through Commune Capital. Mikey Taylor understands something most entrepreneurs never figure out. Making money and keeping wealth are two very different games. And now, as mayor of Thousand Oaks, Mr. Mayor, he's operating at the intersection of business, leadership, investing, influence, and long-term impact. This conversation is about the evolution from chasing success to engineering freedom, stability, and legacy. Mikey, welcome to Uncommon Wealth.
Thanks for having me, man.
Most people, Mikey, know pieces of your story: skating, St. Archer, real estate, but I'm assuming very few understand the psychological evolution behind all of that. So who was Mikey before money and success, and who is Mikey now?
That's a big question.
Welcome to Uncommon Wealth.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. Before success, I was a kid who was more obsessive. Like when I got into things, I got all in, and that became my world. And I typically like doing things that are challenging. What I've learned about myself is I really enjoy the pursuit of greatness or the pursuit of whatever my goal is. And typically when I actually hit the goal, the feeling isn't as good as I made it out in my head.
It's anticlimactic.
It really is. And so I had to learn that over time. But I would say, growing up, I was always really good at setting goals and then achieving them. I just learned over time that I liked the process more than I liked the outcome.
I respect that a lot, man. I'm an avid golfer now. So my addiction is golf. And I literally just ran off the golf course here. It's raining today, but it was a 5-hour round for whatever reason, because we walked and it was just a slow walk today. But I love golf because not only is it a microcosm of life, you're going to hit good shots, good lies, bad lies. But it's the constant pursuit of perfection that will never be obtained. And when you get the birdies, they feel good for like 2 seconds, and then you have to think about the next shot. And I think business and entrepreneurship and success in life is kind of the same way. We put so much focus on achieving a certain goal, and then when you hit it, if you're driven and wired the way I think you and I are, it's on to the next. And often my wife asks me, when are you ever going to be content and satisfied? And I'm like, babe, I am content and satisfied. I'm thrilled where I'm at, but I've got visions for more. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I feel that 100%. I would say, I like golf for the same reason. You can feel good after a birdie and then back it up by a double bogey. And it's like, wait, what just happened? And, I would say the only caveat that I would say out of everything you said is I had to change the way I viewed about the more portion of it, because how we are wired, I think it can be very productive to chase more. 100% it could be productive. But what I had to rebalance was, am I driving towards more because something in my life is lacking? And that one, I had to go through a pretty dark time to find the answer of that. And what that looked like for me, because I got obsessive with things, whatever those things were that I was doing became my identity. So when I was a pro skateboarder, that's what I was. I was a pro skateboarder. That's what my life was. That was why I was here. And
your identity.
It was totally my identity. And the challenge I had is when I was no longer a pro skateboarder, and after I sold the first business, I was in this scenario where I was married at this point for about 7 years. I had 2 young children at the time, I think 2 and 4, no longer a pro, no longer had my business, and I felt completely lost. And that was a moment for me where I kind of had a reckoning that a lot of people face post-retirement. And I just didn't know who I was. I didn't know why I was here. I knew I had skill sets. I knew that I was doing things in the past that brought me enjoyment and fulfillment, and all of them were gone. And so I spent a lot of time trying to answer the identity question in a way or in which it wouldn't ever be taken from me again. And so that was a big reframe for me. And then the second one is I'm no longer chasing more for the same reason. Like I think in the past, I was chasing more because I wanted to feel good about myself. I wanted to be validated, and I wanted people to look at me and go, gosh, that guy's good at this. And that's not the same anymore. Now I'm trying to do more only to take the things that I have been given responsibility over and do well at them. And if I do well at them, then I think that's the opportunity to then do more.
How old were you when you were a professional skateboarder?
So I officially turned pro when I was 20 years old. And I went from 20 to about 33. So I had a long career.
And during that phase, were you already thinking entrepreneurially?
You know what? Yes, but I didn't realize it. So when I was skating, most skaters get a manager, and that manager does all of their deals for them. A lot of times they almost act as the intercessor between you, the athlete, and all your sponsors. And for me, I actually went in a different path. I negotiated all my own deals. I actually loved doing that. When I had sponsors, I tried to get really involved with the sponsor to understand how my product was being designed, how my product was being marketed. I liked being more involved. I just didn't understand that that was an entrepreneurial kind of move. I just thought it was better if I knew what was going on so that I can put some control in my hands to drive my brand and make more money, etc. So
keep going.
So I discovered it. I would say what really exposed it for me was because I had a craft or a career that I couldn't do forever. What I was going to do next was always kind of front of mind for me. And I had this weird idea that because I didn't go to college, no one would ever employ me after skateboarding. So I just figured I had to start something. Like for me to have a career after skateboarding, that meant I had to start my own companies. And so that was the path I took. And then looking back, I've been entrepreneurial since the beginning. Even when it came to me getting sponsors and making money, my first move to get sponsors was just so I could get free product. And then I was taking that product and selling it to all the kids that skated in my neighborhood for money. And so it was always there. I just didn't know it was there.
What did that industry, the skateboard industry, the skating industry, teach you about branding and influence? And I'm assuming this is really before social media kind of took off.
Yeah. So when I was skating, there was no social media. We got our advertising through magazines and movies. And I would say one of the biggest things I learned from skateboarding, and if you're a pro skateboarder, you're forced to learn this. We learn how to market above everyone. And the reason why I say that, inside of skateboarding, there's only really 2 board manufacturers, but there's 200 skateboard companies. And so what that means is kids are riding the same product. All of the product is the same. So it's our job to market a product to feel like it's better than the others, even though at face value, it's all the same. And that's the same with shoes. Like there's not that many shoe manufacturers out there. And so we just had to get hyper good at creating a vibe and a feel and a culture and a community when we sold product. And that really, really helped me after skateboarding. With everything I've done now, it's been heavily brand forward, and it wouldn't be if I wasn't a skater.
How difficult was it psychologically to walk away from one identity after becoming known that you're a skater? How difficult was it to shift that psychology?
To this day, I'm 43 years old, right? To this day, me moving from having my identity as a skateboarder into the next thing was the hardest thing I have ever done in my whole life. It was brutal. And the thing that made it hard was, number one, it was my identity. So I had 25 years of being a skater and 14 of those years being pro. And then on top of that, I was well known. I was, I think, top 10 in the world for about a decade. And so when I stopped skateboarding, I had, at this point, social media was here. So I probably had about 1 million followers, in total from all the platforms. And they all knew me for being a skater. So not only did I have to change my identity internally to be able to know why I was actually here, I then had to go through the exercise of taking a following that was watching me because I was a skateboarder and transitioning that into something completely new. And that was, I had no roadmap to follow on that one. Like there weren't a lot of skaters that had done that. And so I was just trying to figure it out in real time. And it was brutal. The comments that I was getting during that time, everything that I was being told is that I'm doing the wrong thing. And so imagine, and entrepreneurs are going to know this. Whenever you do something, most people are going to think you're crazy. And you have to maintain this confidence internally that you're doing the right thing. And when you add social media on top of it, it was a constant reminder that all the people following, 1 million people, did not want me to do what I was doing. And that was hard. It's the hardest thing I've ever done.
I've talked to, including myself, right, being a former soccer player, and up until the age of 21, when I realized that dream was over for me, my identity was, I was a soccer player. You asked me, what is it that about you? I'm like, I'm a soccer player. I'm a soccer player. Right. I've got a good friend that retired from Major League Baseball at the age of 35. I've got other friends that are pro golfers, other friends that I've met that are out of the NFL now, out of the NBA. And every single one of them, Mikey, struggles with that next phase of their life. Right. If they weren't thinking about it beforehand. And most athletes, I don't think, are, because we're so invested in being that best version of ourselves. We're not really thinking about the next phase of our life. And it comes either due to injury or due to other circumstances, that it's a blunt stop to that phase of your life. And there's not a smooth transition. And so I guess that transitions to entrepreneurship. A lot of entrepreneurs get trapped inside of the identity of their first success, and they fail to evolve, and they stay stuck in that first identity. Why do you think that is?
Well, I mean, when you think about what it takes for an athlete to become professional, you're so far past the 10,000 hours. Like for me, when I was skating 6 hours a day, every single day for 30 years. And so it's just time built into yourself. And when it stops, I mean, just think about that. Like you had 30 years of doing the same thing 6 hours a day, and all of a sudden you're just not doing it. I think it's totally normal for you to go, what the heck just happened? I think the challenge is most people are not taught how to transition the identity into the next thing. That becomes the difficulty of what's next. Is not a lot of athletes do this well. And so we just haven't had great guidance on how to prepare for it. And then when we're preparing for it, how to do it well. And I think, you starting this conversation off when we were talking about legacy planning and setting up your finances, this is a big one, right? So the thing that you have to protect yourself from is when your career ends, you need to avoid going into survival mode. And if you're spending everything you're making, you have no runway to get you into the next thing. And so if you're in survival mode, you don't even have the luxury of fixing what's hurt inside. You just got to go on, what do I have to do to survive? And so I think that's a big one, just making sure you have the runway to get through it and knowing that you're not going to solve this overnight. This is going to take you a couple years to figure out. And then what you're going to experience on the other side can actually be better. You just need to be prepared for what's in front of you.
How did St. Archer come to be your next thing after skating?
Okay, so I had this idea that I had to start a business for my life to be somewhat fruitful after skateboarding.
And this is while you were still skating?
This is when I was still skateboarding. Yeah. And so I was trying to figure out what company to start inside of skateboarding. That's typically what we do, is if a skater is going to start a company, it's inside the world they know.
Yeah, you stay in that vertical. Yeah,
100%. And I was with a friend one day and we're talking about companies. And he actually said something to me so obvious, but it was so profound when he said it. And he looked at me and went, why do we all start companies inside of our world? Why don't we take what we know how to build inside of our world and apply it to a world that's never seen it? And, do it in an industry where the ceiling isn't so low, which is the case for skateboarding. And so when he said that to me, we just started going on a brainstorming mission of what company we could start outside of skateboarding, but apply the marketing concepts that we use inside of our world. And at this time, my friend was managing pro surfers, and he had a pro surfer, and somebody approached him about an alcohol brand. I think it was like a tequila or a vodka. And
before tequila and vodka were the thing.
At that point, they were. And so he told the surfer that he was representing, he was like, hey, I don't think you could do alcohol. It just doesn't fit your brand because surfers are pretty healthy. But I think you could do beer. I bet you can get away with beer. And he was telling me that story, and that led to us going, why don't we do beer? Like, we could do beer. We could cut into the energy drink space because energy drinks were going after a lot of athletes. And so we went for it. We had no idea what that meant. We didn't know how to brew beer, but it took us about a year of doing research to figure out if we could do it. And then once we decided that we could, we went all in.
And this was before the microbrew craze kind of took off. You were on the front end of that wave, weren't you?
The inside of craft beer, the wave was coming. So what we recognize at this point, it sounds so childish to view it this way, but when we would go to parties or gatherings, we would see everybody bring the stocks, right? It was like Coors, Coronas, Paps. And then you would see a couple people bring like a Racer 5 or a Ballast Point. And when we started seeing more and more of that, that's kind of when we recognized the trend. And so I would say we got in when the wave was forming, and then we rode it as it was growing.
And you helped build St. Archer into a massive brand that ultimately exited to a massive company in Miller Coors. And most people glamorize exits, right? The focus is all about the exit, the exit, the exit. But a lot of founders, entrepreneurs, business owners, they don't understand what happens after the liquidity event takes place. So my question is about after the exit, after the liquidity. What surprised you most after you sold?
Okay, so if you have not sold a business before, this is the first thing that you have to understand is most buyers are going to present a deal where they're going to buy your company. They're going to allow you to continue running it, but they're going to be the firepower to grow. They're going to introduce you into their distribution, and they're going to be the scale you didn't have. 99% of the time, that is not true. You come in, it's 6 months of transition, and before you know it, they're running your business the way they run business, not the way that you built it to get to that point. So that's the first part you need to know. Number two, when you're structuring a buyout, most people don't know how to structure the correct buyout. So most of them are hurdle based. So a company is typically going to buy a percentage of your company up front, and then you're usually going to have a 2 to 3 year buyout that's going to be you hitting hurdles to achieve it.
Otherwise known as an earnout, right?
Otherwise known as an earnout. Mm-hmm. Most people don't know how to structure that correctly. And what happens is they don't ever earn the earnout that they think they're going to get.
And they're counting on that, by the way.
And they're counting on it. Exactly. So that's a second factor. And then I would say the third factor is entrepreneurs typically put everything into a business. They sacrifice time away from their families, away from their kids, their friends, their overall lifestyle goes into building a business. And a lot of times we view it as our baby. And when you sell it, it's no longer yours. And that's hard for an entrepreneur. So I would say for most entrepreneurs, if you're going to sell a business, just have the mindset that you're probably only going to be there a couple years, and then you're going to have to go start something new.
Did that exit for you, Mikey, create freedom or pressure?
You know what's weird? That was one of the things I was not expecting when... So you sell a company, right? You ink the deal, and then you're just staring at your bank account. You're waiting for the wire to come in. And then that wire hits, and the feeling I had was so different than what I was expecting. I thought it was going to be high fives, hugs, and freedom. I had this feeling of like preservation that hit me. It was like, oh my gosh, I have so much money in this account now, I can't blow it. And I felt myself becoming so much more conservative. And I had to wrestle through that one because I wanted to make sure that the things that I did to get me here, I no longer abandoned and transitioned into being something totally different than I was. I was not expecting that one. I thought it was going to be just, oh, now I have more options and I'm going to do more of what I was doing. My first response is, okay, pull everything in and don't do anything. It was very unexpected.
So what did you learn during that process about taxes and wealth preservation during that process?
Okay, so first one that hit me is I paid more in taxes that year than I had in collective of every year I've ever paid taxes. I paid more that one year than the 15 years prior. So that hurt. And second, I would say I started looking at investments a little bit differently. I didn't look at investments first on tax advantages, but tax advantages started coming into the equation more than they did before. So I was still looking at, my risk. I was still looking at return profile, but I wanted to make investments that helped bring that tax burden down. And so that changed once I had that liquidity event.
And where were your advisors, your CPA, your financial advisor, your exit planner? Where were they before the liquidity event happened to help you mitigate the taxes of the liquidity event?
Okay, so I had financial advisors, and they were at that time prior to exit, they were doing more of the standard stuff. I had a SEP IRA and I had a Roth IRA when I qualified. And, I was starting to make investments into real estate. So I was able to get some depreciation loss. But the problem was,
this is what happens when we have a mayor on the podcast, by the way.
You know what? I just turned it on. Everybody, my apologies. I just turned it on airplane mode, but
you are now a public servant, sir. You better answer that phone.
I would say that the challenge that I had is I didn't give my advisors enough time in the process of us looking for an exit to potentially help for that capital gain event when it happened. And so we were kind of blindsided by the tax hit I got hit with. But I would say after that, things really started changing. Leading up to it, I wasn't taking advantage of tax protections enough, though.
Looking back, what financial structures do you wish you had known about? And if you're talking to the entrepreneurs listening to this podcast, you wish more entrepreneurs understood before they have a liquidity event?
Okay, so for me personally, and I know you focus on more high net worth individuals, so this is going to apply for this group. For anyone who's like just getting started or general, just know that what I'm about to tell you does not work for everyone. Looking back, I would have skipped the 401ks. I would have skipped the IRAs. I would have skipped locking up money for my 60s. And I would have put probably more at that time into real estate. And then secondarily, I would have taken advantage of more opportunities on the business front that I was taking. Like at that point, I was not buying cars in my actual business. I wasn't taking advantage of things like the Augusta rule and using my home for business events. There were a lot of things that I just was not tapping into that I do now for sure.
Do you think most founders and entrepreneurs, business owners are massively underprepared for taxes when they finally get that liquidity event?
Well, yeah, because most entrepreneurs put everything into their business. So I would say the one thing that I notice about people like me, almost all of our net worth is in the equity of our company. And so it doesn't surprise me that when we get hit with an exit, we're like, wait, this much is going to the government? And I think that's probably the main factor on why. Maybe the thing to change is if you have the opportunity to take money off the table, or if you're looking at the cash that you're getting, maybe your company produces a dividend for you and there's no money or there's no opportunity for you to take that money and put it into your business to grow. Let's say your business doesn't need that. I would probably start diversifying outside of your business earlier than you think, to try to build up some of that depreciation or some of that loss that you can carry forward for an exit. I know there's people that use like insurance policies or like PPLIs before they sell a business. I never messed with those, but I know there's some options on the insurance side too.
Yeah, absolutely. PPLI is a massive opportunity to put businesses or real estate or any massive asset that an individual might have into a PPLI, so that when a liquidity event happens, it happens in that tax wrapper and you can avoid those capital gains. But there's also trust structures that can be put in place through states like Wyoming and South Dakota that have perpetuity laws that allow those taxes to be deferred. For example, Wyoming has a perpetuity law that says 1,000 years after your last heir dies. Now, your last heir could be 5, 6, 10 generations from now, but 1,000 years after that last heir dies, the taxes become due.
Yeah.
South Dakota recently came out and said, you know what, we're just going to eliminate perpetuity laws altogether. Now it's indefinite. The capital gains are deferred indefinitely. And all too often, I'm finding that these business owners, founders, entrepreneurs don't even know things like that exist in the trust in the tax law because their CPA doesn't know it exists.
Yep. That's right. That's right. Yeah. So I would say that you know, to really simplify the question you asked, I used to only have a CPA, and then post exit, I started bringing on a tax strategist to help with my forward-looking planning, as opposed to just doing my, you know, CPA, can you just do my taxes for me this year and tell me what I owe? I moved away from that and started planning on making investments that were forward-looking, that were able to help. You know, I know one, and I'm not a CPA, so, you know, don't do your research on this one, but we didn't structure our company as a C Corp. And I think you have an opportunity, if it's a C Corp, to roll gains into the next business you start. We sold our business before opportunity zones was a thing. So if I would have sold, you know, post 17, that could have been an opportunity at that point. But yeah, man, you learn from your experience. If you haven't sold a business yet, bring that onto your team now and start planning for it.
And I will say a common thread amongst all the guests that come onto the Uncommon Wealth podcast that have had liquidity events or are planning towards a liquidity event, and they're uber successful individuals with substantial personal financial net worth, because you're right, our companies are the largest asset for the most part sitting on our balance sheet. They say repeatedly that the CPA is not the guy or gal, but it's not the person to be getting this advice from. They're very good at filing tax forms and making sure you meet deadlines and you fill out the proper forms, but they're not tax strategists for the most part. Now, there are those outliers out there that I work with, and I know they exist, where they do strategic tax planning, but there's a big difference between strategic tax planning and doing compliance tax work.
100%.
Right?
You just nailed it.
What mistakes do you repeatedly see wealthy entrepreneurs making after the exit?
That's a good question. I would say it depends on the level of the exit. Like, you know, for some people, they might have an exit and that's it for them. They never have to do another thing again. Others might have like a $5 million exit, maybe a 10. And depending on your lifestyle, that might not get you to the remainder of your life. And so depending on where you land on that, I would say if you don't have enough to give you full financial freedom for the rest of your life, you got to control your lifestyle. That's probably the biggest one. Is you sell a business and all of a sudden your expenses like 20x. And you just need to be prepared that if you're spending more than your portfolio is yielding, you're going to get hit with the reality that you got to figure out the next thing. I would say the second one, though, is what I touched on when we sold our business, is a lot of founders, when they get to an exit, they get so scared about basically making a mistake, and they no longer capture the upside that's in front of them. So I would say the best way to do it is when you start having like real liquidity like that, you still want to go after upside. You just want to start playing a different game where you're trying to minimize downside at the same time. So, you know, if you're looking at your portfolio, one of the best things that I was given that I started implementing about a decade ago was making uncorrelated investments and trying to build out my portfolio where I had maybe 8 to 12 uncorrelated investments. so that one industry was hit, the others didn't fall with it. And that actually brought a lot of comfort to me because I was no longer just trying to pick off a 4 or 5% yield. I could still go after the maybe blended 9 to 12, but I wasn't taking great risks to get there. That I wish I would have learned that one earlier.
Have you seen any of your friends that have had exits? I've seen it with people that are clients that once they have that liquidity event, they actually also go the reverse of being conservative. Now they start becoming angel investors or private equity investors into deals, and they're throwing 100,000, 500,000 at these businesses that really aren't viable, but they're just taking flyers. Have you ever seen that?
100%. I've seen it too much. So basically, the thing that entrepreneurs need to know is we're entrepreneurs. That doesn't mean we're great investors. And so we can build a business and have a big exit. That doesn't mean that we are now the most sophisticated investor that can make early angel rounds and just, 14 to 20x our investment. And you got to be careful with that one. I would say for me, the biggest reason why when I sold the brewery, I didn't create my next business inside of the alcohol space is because I didn't want to get trapped with overconfidence and then repeating the same thing that worked in the past. And I think that's really important for us to recognize. There are going to be a lot of founders that gain confidence through an exit. You really got to maintain your discipline and probably bring people into your team that are investors to help you make calculated decisions as opposed to rolling the dice the way it kind of feels when you're starting a company. And then I would say the other challenge is with entrepreneurs, we feel like anything's possible. We think we can do anything. And that is very different than investing in a founder and trying to see the things in him that remind you of yourself. And that's not always a recipe for success. Like you do need to bet on the jockey. I'm 100% a believer in that. But you want to make sure that that jockey understands how to surround himself with people that can actually scale and then get that company to an exit, because those are two completely different skill sets.
I think that's a fascinating conversation and topic because people spend decades building wealth, but almost no time engineering what happens once they finally have it, right? And so you eventually shifted heavy into real estate and alternative investing through Commune Capital. Why did you pick real estate?
Okay, so when I started the brewery, I was investing in self-storage at the time. And I really liked self-storage for a passive investment because one, I liked physical assets. Two, it gave me two things that I think are very desirable for an investor. I got cash flow and I got appreciation. And probably the last one is when I went through recessions, that asset class performed different than like the money I had in the stock market. And so I found myself having a comfort towards physical real estate investments. The reason why I moved into real estate as my business was kind of two reasons. Number one, I wanted to create a company that helped, at this point, athletes transition out of their craft and into retirement 2.0. A lot of the athletes that I was friends with, they either invested in super speculative investments that a lot of
bars, a lot of clubs, a lot of restaurants,
100% that they lost their money on, or two, a lot of them just sat on cash and it just sat in a savings account. So I wanted to create a company that helped that transition for them. And then number two, when I was telling you that I took a marketing model that worked in skateboarding and applied it to the brewery space, that worked in craft beer. And the big reason why I think it worked is we brought something to the market that they hadn't seen before. And what that looks like is in the beer industry, everybody sold a product. So they brewed a beer and they marketed it with a certain hops or, infusing a fruit into it or having a stronger alcohol content. Nobody sold the consumer before they got to the store. And that's what we did. We sold a California lifestyle, but we sold it through our lens, which was surf, skate, snow, music, art, culture. So when somebody bought our beer, they weren't buying it because it was a, gold winning ale. They bought it because when they drank it, they felt like they were part of our California.
Yeah.
when we sold, I was looking for an industry that had never seen what we did in the beer space or the skateboarding world. And when I looked at real estate, more specifically commercial real estate, I looked at it and went, oh my gosh, this is ripe for it. This industry is so stale. It's done one way. Not clowning people that wear suits. I wear suits because I'm the mayor now, but it was all suits from, Ivy League schools and bankers. There was nobody that really marketed something hip and cool. And so I wanted to come into an industry and try to disrupt it. And so those were the two reasons why I chose building a business inside of real estate.
Thank you for not wearing a suit today, by the way. I appreciate that. How do you think, Mikey, wealthy investors should think differently today versus 10 years ago?
That's a good question. I would say a lot has changed. Like, I think 10 years ago, like a PE ratio really mattered, or your value-based investing was the driver towards making sound investments. And that's hard to do now. Our like a PE ratios are so off now. The market is basically driven by, 7 different companies. And because we're going through so much disruption with AI, it's really hard, in my perspective, to make wise decisions. And so, what I do, I have more investments on the private side than I do the public market now. And my original philosophy of have the majority in the public market and a little bit in alternatives has just switched. And so I find the fundamentals being more solid in real estate. So that's now the majority of my portfolio. And then when I make investments outside of real estate, I'm not trying to do it myself. I'm trying to find the experts in venture or private equity or AI and put investments with them. But I have found that I have moved in way more into the private market than the public.
So then do you believe that the traditional investment model or the traditional retirement model is broken?
I think the traditional retirement model works for the majority of people, but if your goal is financial freedom early, I don't think the traditional model works.
Yeah, I don't think it works for the listeners of this podcast.
What's that?
I don't think it works. I don't think it works for the listeners of this podcast.
Yeah, I don't think it has ever worked for us, basically.
What separates people who build wealth from people who actually keep generational wealth?
Oh, I think it comes down to parenting at that point. Like, there's a cycle that happens with wealthy people, and it very rarely goes past 3 generations. And when you think about it, it makes sense. You have, let's say you have John, you're the one that built the wealth in your family. And then you're going to have a son or a daughter, and that son or daughter typically can maintain it. They have a challenge growing it. And then, your grandchildren usually are the ones that lose it. And that's usually the 3-generation cycle. And I think the reason why that happens is a lot of us as founders, we focus on giving our kids the life that we never had. And so once we give them abundance, the challenge is we don't teach them how to go build themselves. We kind of just give them the free pass to live life based on the wealth we gave them. And I think that's why it breaks. And so I have young kids. My oldest is 13, so I cannot speak on this from experience. I have not brought my next generation through this cycle. But what I'm doing to try to plan for that, we actually don't show our kids a lot of our wealth. We live very modestly, and I'm constantly trying to instill tools and skills for them to go earn and them to go build. And so I have no problem giving them an inheritance, but I don't want them to just take it and check out for the rest of their lives. I want them to go take what I was given and 4X it and go apply themselves into the community and go, benefit people around them. And I think that just comes down to parenting. I think we have to instill certain values in our kids so that they don't check out when they're given something.
And that's great while you're alive, right? Because you can have those conversations, you can have those teaching moments. And I have 2 daughters, 15 and 13, so I'm right there with you. I understand that same thought and feeling. A lot of what we do with our clients is helping to put family governance in place and putting trust structures in place that prevent them from being lazy trust fund babies.
Yeah.
And so there's certain things that can be done in a trust structure that says, okay, whatever the corpus, whatever the principal amount in the trust is, my children, you can say up to age 25, 30, 35, you can put gates in place that the older they get, the more successful they can get more and more. But I've seen things where your kids can take distributions from the trust that are equal to their W-2, their K-1, their 1099s, right? That forces them to go out and be productive and earn, or there's a certain amount for philanthropy on an annual basis. You can create family foundations inside of the family wealth structure. But that family governance point, having a good trustee that will adhere to the trust documents that you and your wife put in place, that's how you start to create generational wealth, right? So that trust document is like you speaking to them while you're alive, after you're dead. And it's what the Rockefellers did so well and what the Vanderbilts did so poorly, right? So, Cornelius Vanderbilt was uber successful, uber wealthy in his time, had little to no family governance. So within 3 generations, right? Anderson Cooper being, one of those, part of that family lineage, the wealth was gone.
Right.
But what the Rockefellers did that the Vanderbilts did not do is they put family governance in place. They meet on an annual basis as a family, and they discuss the investment opportunities that every family member is facing, and they vote on whether it's a good opportunity or not. They put gates in place. They put parameters in place that tells them how much they can take a distribution from the trust. And the other thing that they did is they put life insurance on every adult child or every adult when they become an adult in the family. And upon that death, it creates a waterfall back into the trust, which creates perpetuity for generation after generation after generation. So there are things that can be done from that level. And as a father like yourself of young women, I want them to become independent, self-sustaining, self-earning, but I also want them to know what it's like to work, build something, work for your living, and let the trust match the effort and the results that you're making on an annual basis.
That's great. That's really good.
Yeah, man. At your level, how much of the conversation shifts and becomes about tax efficiency versus just pure returns?
That's a good question. It's a factor, but I actually try not to make decisions based on taxes entirely. I try to look at it more holistically. What is the investment? Is it a good investment? Does the return profile match the risk? And if that's a yes, and maybe I'm looking at a handful of different options, then I want there to be some tax efficiency with it. But for me, I've actually tried to avoid making investments entirely based on tax efficiency, because that can bring on a different type of challenge that I personally want to avoid. And so I have friends that hit me up all the time, and it's usually around September, October, sometimes November. Mikey, I've got a tax bill. Oh my gosh, what type of real estate do you have for me that I can get my loss and wipe it out? And they're in such a scramble to avoid the taxes because the tax bill has become so large because it's been deferred for so long that they actually don't have the capital to pay it. And so I try to avoid that scenario, but I'm not going to tell you I don't look at taxes. That's a big reason why I'm in real estate. Like I get to make an investment in real estate. I get my accelerated depreciation. I get to take a big chunk of that year one, and I get to plan now for the future on when I'm going to use the loss that I'm harvesting. So it's a factor. It's just not the driving factor, if that makes sense.
100%. And I'll tell you a saying that was told to me, and I've never forgotten it since I've heard it, is you cannot let the tax tail wag the investment dog.
Yep.
Right? And I'll give you another example. I have a client, friend and client in California, uber successful, had a great year last year, and due to lack of strategic tax planning in advance, that same issue popped up September, October, November, and he parted with $1 million of liquidity to get about $1 million offset in his taxes. Now, the investment is okay,
Right.
but that was an example of the tax tail wagging the investment dog for him. And I've had this conversation with him. I said, how sustainable is that on an annual basis? Like, are you going to annually part with $1 million just to get $1 million tax write-off?
Right.
And he's like, man, I don't think it is sustainable. And I said, well, okay, with a little bit of proactive tax planning in advance, you know, for $50,000, $100,000, whatever the attorneys charge, to create certain level of LLCs, holding companies, business trusts, personal irrevocable grantor trusts, you can eliminate or defer, I should say, not eliminate. You can defer all of those taxes in that perpetuity, you know, after 1,000 years of your last heir dying, if you just have enough forethought and foresight to put proper planning in place. And so it's an issue that comes up consistently and repeatedly that, oh my God, I'm having a great year. Oh my God, what am I going to do to get the tax breaks? Yeah.
Now, where I see it the most, just so you guys know, because I run an investment firm, I get called from people that are typically in sales, and they're the ones that are usually at the end of the year going, dude, this year's crazy. What can I do? And, you know, you nailed it. Plan for a few years, 3 to 5 years ahead of where you're currently at. That'll make that scenario so much better. And, you know, the other thing in real estate, because that's what I primarily focus on, one of the examples you see in real estate is somebody will buy a bunch of Airbnbs because you can take your passive loss and offset your active income on short-term rentals. And then they have a portfolio. They have so much deferred taxes that they're sitting on, and their portfolio stops performing. And then they're looking at it going, I can't sell this thing. I can't deal with the recapture. I got to figure out a 1031, and you just become limited if you don't do it correctly. So I think that's the overall principle. You want to keep as many options on the table as possible. And if you're making decisions based on tax help alone, you're really removing a lot of the options that you have available.
100%. And that 1031 strategy is good, right? But it's not a long-term solution, because you're going to 1031 to the next property, 1031 to the next. At some point, the 1031s have to stop. Right? At some point. So I know the answer, but most people don't know what the solution is to get out of that 1031 cycle. I had a guy on the podcast not too long ago, and he's in that phase. He's 1031ing properties. And he's like, it's tax free because he can take a line of credit against those properties on a tax free basis. Right. And then when he sells it, 1031, he pays off that line of credit to the next one. And I'm like, yeah. But what happens when that Ferris wheel or that carousel needs to stop? And he's like, man, I don't know. My CPA hasn't told me that. I'm like, well, no, your CPA is not going to tell you that because he doesn't know. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Most real estate investors try to do that till they die.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, then it's okay. Right. Because then there's a step up in basis, but then you have a liquidity issue. Right. So great. You avoided the taxes because your beneficiaries get that step up in basis. But now where's their liquidity coming from?
Correct.
Right?
Yep. Not perfect strategy.
One thing I've noticed interviewing high performers is eventually the conversation shifts and changes from accumulation to protection. And you've already discussed this. You've already touched on it. At what point did legacy become more important than growth? Or are you there yet?
You know what? It changed for me, actually. It's so funny that you asked that question. Growth was my entire focus post-exit still. And the reason why I was in this mindset that I was not going to give my kids anything, and just hear me out with this one. I was like on this mindset of I'd rather teach my kids what to do than pass them an inheritance that, is 8-9 figures. And I ended up changing my perspective on that one. And I think it's what we just talked about. I was so worried about basically dooming them by giving them an abundance of wealth and not really teaching them how to go earn on their own. But the second one is, it was actually became biblical. I was reading the Old Testament and basically saw in the Old Testament that we are called to give our kids an inheritance. And that changed my whole view on it. Once I read that, I was like, okay, I've got this wrong. And so I tried to take a more balanced approach where I do want to give my kids an inheritance. The governance on it is a phenomenal point. And, the third factor is I'm not going to neglect my responsibilities as dad to actually teach them at the same time. What do they say? You can walk and chew gum at the same time. I had forgot that when it came to this conversation. So all that to say, I am still in growth mode right now, but the reason why is less about a number I'm trying to chase, and it's more about fulfillment, to tell you the truth. Like, I really enjoy having an idea of something that I can create and then trying to bring that idea to reality. I just enjoy that process. And so I have found myself in a scenario where I enjoy building. And if that means I increase my wealth, great. If it means I lose it, so what? I am really enjoying the building process of doing new companies. So,
and I think it's important for your children to see that.
Yeah.
I think it's crucially important because it's a struggle. Entrepreneurship is not all marshmallows and rainbows, right? There are very dark moments. There are stressful periods of time, and our children see how we act and respond during those moments. And I think they're watching, man. They're watching from afar.
Yeah.
They see how you respond. They see how you're present with them. And if you're distracted because of what's going on in work, I use work. I don't feel like we work, but you know what I'm saying.
I do.
And I think a lot of the listeners feel that way as well. But I will tell you, after this podcast is over, we're gonna powwow off to the side, because I think you and I can give you some direction on that legacy planning component that allows you to still grow, but also protect your children from the fear that you have of them being, that silver spoon and not working hard. There's answers for that, for sure, man.
I love that.
What are the biggest hidden risks wealthy entrepreneurs ignore? It's a big question.
The hidden risks.
The biggest hidden risks wealthy entrepreneurs ignore.
You want it business focused, or you want it just overall?
I want whatever you feel like is the right answer.
For me personally, I think the biggest risk that wealthy entrepreneurs miss is the kids. Like, I go back to that one a lot, and that's mainly because the examples that I had of entrepreneurs that were successful, their marriages were broken and their relationship with their kids were poor. Yeah. And that to me is always the thing that I hung on to, is I didn't want to just be successful financially and look at my family and see it in despair. And I see
are we really successful if, we've made millions and millions, but yet we're on our third wife and our kids hate us?
Exactly. So look, at the end of the day, if you're a wealthy entrepreneur, like, the risk at this point. Like, you don't get to that type of wealth without understanding the risk on the business side. So I think at this point we kind of know what those are. The family, I think probably the health part, the faith part, I think here's what it is. I'm going to button this thing up. Entrepreneurs have a gift at being so singular focused at the mission in front of them that we neglect the other parts that make a total life successful. And I think that is the biggest risk, is when we die, we don't take any of this stuff with us at all. And so I think it's really important to try to look at who we are going to be before we die and look back and go, yeah, I nailed it. Still married, great relationship with my kids, great relationship with my grandkids, taught them how to do these things, was involved with the community. Like, that is the thing that I think actually matters. And to me, that's the biggest risk in front of successful entrepreneurs.
Faith, family, fitness, finances, fun, right? Those are the 5 F's that I think. And you know what? Were we really successful if our business was our only success?
Right.
And I don't think that's not how I want to be remembered. And clearly that's not how you want to be remembered.
No, I personally want to avoid that at all costs. I'm terrified of that.
100%, man. Do you think most affluent families, and I know this is speculation, but do you think most affluent families have enough planning around estate taxes, succession planning, and liquidity planning?
Depending at the level, if we're talking north of 50, I think so. I would say when you start getting sub 10, maybe even sub 15, probably not.
Yeah, I agree. 20 is about the mark where I've seen.
Yeah,
right.
I would agree.
You know, a $10 million net worth or a $10 million exit, it's very cookie cutter advice.
Mm-hmm.
Above 50, it's very specialized and customized advice, especially at the 100 level.
Yeah, because you start
everything
right.
Go ahead.
You start getting into family office style. At that point,
Exactly.
you've got your own advisory just for your singular family, and you're doing it at that point. It's if you're not there yet, you really gotta avoid in my perspective, the standard advisor that's doing all the things he did for you when you had a net worth sub $1 million. That's kind of the scary part to be.
And I do a lot of speaking at family office meetings and conferences around the country. I was in Zurich, I was in Puerto Rico, Dallas, Houston. I'm going to be in LA in September. I'll hit you up.
Please do.
San Francisco. And at all of these family office conferences, there's talks about private equity investments. There's talks about family governance. There's talk about philanthropy. I am the only guy there talking about estate planning and life insurance structures.
Right.
The only guy there. And I will tell you, Mikey, there's some very famous families and their family office managers sitting in those rooms. And the attention that I get and the questions I get after I speak on life insurance and estate planning and family governance it's shocking to me. It's a conversation that's not having enough. And everybody's talking about the next best investment, the next place to put their money, how to manage certain aspects of the family, technology stack inside of the family office, but I'm shocked, not a lot of discussion around life insurance. And when I talk to these family office managers about life insurance as an asset class, to your point, a non-correlated asset class that fits inside of the family office portfolio, and waterfall planning, how do you go from generation 1 to generation 2 to generation 3 and refill that tank? And how do you become more philanthropic as a family, but also not giving away the inheritance for the next generations? Life insurance is a good answer for that. And I'm just shocked at the lack of discussion and conversations around that topic.
That's a sweet spot to be in. I love being in rooms where I'm the only one saying something and the attention is just piercing. That's the sweet spot, buddy.
It is, man. I'm still taken aback when I get the remarks and the comments and the questions in the meetings afterwards, but you're right. That is a good spot to be in.
Listen,
I like it.
Enjoy it, because I every time I'm in them, it doesn't take long before you're no longer the only one doing it. It becomes saturated over time. So while you're there, buddy, go for it full force.
Awesome. Well, you're now also mayor of Thousand Oaks. That's a completely different level of responsibility.
Right.
Bro, why step into public leadership?
Yeah. The second glass of wine, man, it makes you say yes to things. Really what it comes down to, I currently live in the city I grew up in, same with my wife, and my parents are here, her parents are here, our whole family's here, grandkids, and we're experiencing something really special. And my wife and I were just up one night talking about, where we wanted to live. We were at a point where we could live anywhere, and I didn't ever want to leave. I love our area. And my wife was like, why don't we go in other areas? There's so many things that we don't have here. And I opened my mouth and I said, babe, instead of us looking for the things we don't have, why don't we try to bring those things here? And she looked at me and said, what does that mean? I'm like, I don't know. And so that was the beginning.
I don't know. Pour me another glass.
That was the beginning of the conversation. And where it ended up going towards was, well, maybe it's time for us to get more involved in the community. And at this time, my wife was pregnant with our fourth, and my business was going through a pretty big growth moment. And so my time was limited. And so what we landed on was, if I ran for city council, I could help be involved with the policy. I could help with the, economic drivers of our community, the management of the money. A lot of city council is real estate. So I was like, gosh, my skill set is like perfect for that. And I can do that and not leave my business. And so we decided on that, and I ran a campaign, not knowing a thing about how to run a campaign. I treated it like a business, and I ended up getting elected in a very crowded field. And this is the fourth year of my first term. And so I'm going to run again. So I got to do a campaign again. And then if I get reelected, my goal is to do another term. So it'll be 2 terms total and then be done.
Be done, or move on to the next thing in politics?
You know what? I started getting a lot of pressure after year 2 of getting elected to do more, move into higher office. And to tell you the honest truth, I have no desire in doing it. Like, number one, I have young kids, and we talked about, not disrupting the family. I don't want to be gone from my kids like that. I enjoy building business. I don't want to step away from my companies. And so what would be the best way to say this? This is the position I've taken. I don't want to do it. I have no desire to do it, but I'm trying to also be willing that if the Lord calls me to do something, I'm willing to walk through the door. And so that's how I'm navigating through it. If I feel like, that opportunity is there, my wife and I are praying about it, and the Lord makes it so obvious that this is what he wants me to do, then I hope that I'm willing to step forward. And if he doesn't, I'm so happily not,
Amen to that. And be careful what you pray for.
Yeah, just prayers. I know. Holy cow.
Do you think your entrepreneurship gives people a better understanding, gives you a better understanding of reality than a traditional politician or a lifelong politician?
Oh, 100%. Yeah, I would say my biggest frustration with politicians is they want to be politicians. And so they come out of school, political science, they start working on campaigns, they want to get elected, and they understand how politics works. And that's their entire experience and knowledge. I don't think that's how our political structure was created. I think our structure was created so that business owners or people that had experience could step in, offer that experience for a limited amount of time, and step out. That's what I think it was originally created for. And I don't want to fall into that as well. So, what I would say is I'm on the local level, so less of the national politics that a lot of us kind of tend to argue about don't apply. Local politics is making sure the roads are paved and it's safe and the infrastructure is available. So I've stepped into this position and just tried to be more pragmatic. If this was my business and there's a problem in front of me, how do I solve it? When you start going above that, the politics start playing more of a factor. And I think that's actually put us in an unhealthy position. And so I'd like to see that change. I would love to see term limits on basically all of the positions. I don't think we're called to be career politicians. I think we're supposed to jump in, help, and jump out.
Especially Congress people and senators.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
How do we create stronger communities and stronger families again?
Man, well, I think you create stronger communities by creating stronger families. So
that's a fair point.
I think it starts in the family. And look, I'll just speak personally, like just through what I've gone through. The thing that has kept my family intact and has put us in a position where I think we are not perfect. My wife and I definitely have challenges, but we have a very healthy marriage. And I think the reason why we have that is both her and I focus our attention on God first and then us second. And, in a marriage, anybody who's married knows this. It's difficult. It's brutal. You have arguments, and it's so easy to focus on how, I feel personally. And what I have found has been so beneficial is when I try to be more selfless, the way the Lord calls me to be, and focus on what my wife needs as opposed to how I'm feeling, the outcome of that is actually, she'll end up doing the same or vice versa. And we have just been able to navigate through really hard times in a way that I can't really take credit for. And so that's what's worked for us. And so I would recommend it if you're not involved in a church. That's been massive. And so I don't want to throw that on you, but just through my experience, that has been the singular reason why we've had such a healthy marriage.
How long have you guys been married?
We are about to celebrate our 16th year.
Congratulations, man.
Thank you.
That's awesome. We'll be celebrating 22 years here in June.
Let's go. That's so good.
Yeah, but I will tell you, when we are not good with each other and we're going through those challenges, it affects everything else in my life.
100%.
Everything else.
Yeah.
It affects my golf game. It affects my business conversations. It affects everything.
Yeah.
So for me, I have to make sure things are good at home in order for me to be good in the right frame of mind for everything else that I do.
Completely agree with you. 100%.
Yeah. What do you hope your children learn from your personal journey?
I want my boys to see what a father and a husband looks like. And I want the same thing for my girls when they go out and, look at starting to date and get married. I'm hoping that I can become a version that showcases what a man, a husband, and a father is actually called to be. And that's kind of driving the majority of what I'm doing right now.
And I think that would be a great legacy to live, right? Or a legacy to leave.
100%. And look, that is not, for any of you that don't know me, that is not me saying I'm perfect. I am so far from it. But I think the things that I do right, I'm not even taking credit for. I think the closest I can live my life to the way God calls me to be will give my sons and my daughters a potentially great example of how their husbands or how they should treat their kids are.
3 more questions for you. What's the most expensive lesson you've ever learned?
Oh, that's a good one. Most expensive lesson was $500,000.
And what was it?
It was an investment that I should not have made.
back to that point after the liquidity event, you threw $500,000 into it.
It was right after the liquidity event. It was ultra confidence, and I started making bets. Here was the lesson I learned. I'll really tie this down. I now put percentages towards the asset classes that I'm putting money into. And so even if I love the idea, I'm maintaining my discipline. I only put 10% in this asset class. I currently have 5. I have 5 more percent to go, period.
I love it.
And I didn't do that. I was like, I got all this money. Let's just start dumping some of these things.
Rock and roll, baby. Let's go.
I shouldn't have done that. That investment, I still should have made. So I still would have made that investment today. I just would have made it probably at $50,000 as opposed to $500,000.
Fair enough. If you lost everything tomorrow, what skills would allow you to rebuild? Okay. The skills that have done really well for me, and I would apply them in the next business. I, for whatever reason, have been given this gift that I'm able to communicate in a way where people listen. And that is very beneficial when you're starting a company because you need people to get on your side before you have anything. And I'd absolutely use that. The marketing side has always done well for me. So I would really be leaning in on marketing, messaging, and really using social media to drive attention towards my new product or new service. And then I would say the last one, and I think this came from skateboarding, because skateboarding is so difficult, we are built through adversity. And so it's just been 20 years of being pounded over and over
that I have created this discipline that is very comfortable when scenarios aren't going great. And I would say those are the 3 factors that have allowed me to build business the way I have.
I love it. Last one. What does uncommon wealth mean to you personally?
Uncommon wealth to me means not following the herd and looking for the opportunities that others don't see. So it's being contrarian, I think, is the ultimate one, building your wealth the way that fits you and not following what other people are doing.
I love it. Mayor Mikey Taylor, thank you for joining the Uncommon Wealth podcast. Thank you for your time today. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, bro.